Good morning. Has everyone had their cup of coffee?
Yes.
Who was stuck in traffic like me this morning? Yeah, that was the easiest part. The harder part is the one that we are going to begin right now, having this conversation on the budget speech. My name is Khululwa Mutwa. I am the CEO of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. We go by SIBIP. I know everyone struggles, SAIBPP, and all sorts of names. And I am honored to guide this program this morning. I see this door is closed. I don't know if it's locked, but I saw the ladies that side. I did not see the gents. So I'm assuming that it's somewhere close by, just so that it's, okay, that side, and then you go around. Sorry? There's a tree. Your landmark is a tree when you are looking for the gents. Okay, so let's get this party going. Our phones on silent mode so that we really pay attention to the feedback that we're going to get this morning. I know that as we sit here, we all have different things that we want to hear. You know, it's like when group photos are taken, everyone is looking for themselves in that photo. Do I look okay? And when they are okay, they say, okay, you can post it, I'm good. And I think it's the same, even with the budget speech, we all have specific interests, and we're hoping that as we go through this morning, all of those interests are going to be uncovered. Do I look okay? That's what we want to know. I'm going to call on stage to do the welcome and opening remarks.
Arnold February, he's the Regional Manager for Business Partners Limited. Arnold.
All right, testing 1, 2. Everybody can hear me loud and clear? Yes. All right, good morning, everybody. So, distinguished guests, leaders of companies, entrepreneurs, speakers, business leaders, and members of the community, I welcome you today to the post-budget speech dialogue. My name is Arnold February. I'm the Regional Investment Manager for a company called Business Partners Limited. It's a pleasure to be here, truly. So, I want to share a couple of things with you. Firstly, an event like this is very important for a couple of reasons. If you consider the national budgets and the speech, it's not just about numbers. It actually has an impact on business, on you as an individual, taxpayer, on your staff, on the clients you deal with, and even friends and families that you associate with. So there's a real impact on it. And the budget, which comes from the public sector, does impact where money flows, what infrastructure will be developed, what is the intent of the country, what is the intent of the ecosystems within the country. And for the entrepreneurs in the room, it's very, very important. Because you as entrepreneurs, you're the ones that we look to for innovation, for job creation, and for economic growth. So today is about translating policy into practical insights. Now we need to answer the following question. What does a budget mean for us? As entrepreneurs, as property practitioners, as taxpayers, as investors, as funders, and people who are contributing meaningfully to the economy. So if you think about it, if you think about it very carefully, the people that we have in this room, how do I say this? They will take the theoretical aspects of the budget and they will talk about the practical implications of it in your lives, in the lives of the retailers that you support and the entrepreneurs that you support, and all these circles of influence that you have, whether it's business or whether it is in your personal life. So it's a very important discussion, and I encourage you to take notes, and I encourage you to ask a lot of questions. So we are honored to have a couple of guests here that I want to mention. So Advocate Kape Moglaga, CEO of Transnet Property. Your leadership in property and infrastructure developments positions you to speak uniquely about the relationship of public investments, infrastructure planning, and the private sector. Where is Advocate Kape? There we go. All right, good. So a warm welcome to you. We also welcome Kulelwa. Where are you? Yeah. So thank you very much for opening for us. CEO of South African Black Property Practitioners. Your work in advancing transformation and inclusion in participation with property sector is very meaningful and important, and we look forward to your contribution as well. We have two keynote speakers today. So Jeremy Lang is the Managing Director of Business Partners Limited. He is a colleague, he's a friend, but he's also my boss. In fact, he's my boss's boss, so I must get that right. He brings invaluable expertise on business funding, on SME, the challenges that SMEs face, and the growth path of entrepreneurs and their development. So Jeremy, your perspective on how the budget impacts access to finance and entrepreneurial sustainability, we're looking forward to it, and I'm sure it will be highly appreciated and received and well received. Budgets may shape the economy, but entrepreneurs shape the future. All right, then, as our second keynote speaker, we are also honored to host the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, Kulekani. Is Kulekani here? There we go. All right, so all the speakers are sitting at one table, so eyes on them. So we look forward to your insights on how business and government can work together to drive inclusive growth and sustainable development in the wake of this budget. All right, we are also looking forward to engaging conversations and robust discussions facilitated by Shelly Boy from Tax Edu SA, or ZERE. Shelly Boy is a chartered accountant. Well, he wears various hats. So it depends on which day of the week you see him. He's an entrepreneur, he's a chartered accountant, he's a tax specialist, he's a podcast host. He is somebody that connects the public sector to the private sector, and the list goes on and on and on. But Shelly Boy, from our side as business partners, a big thank you for this initiative and for allowing business partners and giving us the opportunity to co-sponsor the event. All right, a special welcome to our panelists. We also have Matshidiso Lenkosa, the public finance analyst. We have Neo Kiao, senior tax lecturer from UNISA. We look forward to your discussions, hosted by and facilitated by Shelly Boy. And then lastly, from my side, a big thank you for everybody who's here, who's made the time. Understand that a forum like this, it's not just about the information and what is conveyed. It's about the networks. It's about what you can extract and implement within your lives, within your business, for the better. And you know, an event like this could change your life. Just an idea that is dropped or a thought that is expressed. So embrace what is shared. Engage meaningfully. Ask the difficult questions. Because if we don't ask difficult questions, you're not going to get good insights, right? But enjoy the event. So from my side, a big thank you. and let the games begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now that we have been welcomed, let's get a sense of who's in the room and what's your one thing. I'm going to start at that table, just one. What must they definitely talk about? And I see a mouth opening, and I just looked at her, but I said that table. So I guess then that's the one who's got her one thing. Hey? Anything. So you are those guys who don't even look at those photos and you're like, just send it out. Social media will find what it finds. Okay, and that table, what are you hoping to get out of this morning?
Solutions, I guess, for businesses that we come to try to see how we can help them capital out.
Okay, business partners, they want business. That table?
I think one of the things that you look at the issue of the social grants, when you look at the tax base, I think the other challenge is how to grow our tax base so that then you're able to afford the social grants that we have. Obviously, if we start speaking about the tax base, is that how do you create new businesses and how do you deal with transformation and all of that. So I'm hoping that engagement will happen, that the tax base won't grow by itself. We need initiatives, and obviously we need people like business partners who say our role in creating new entrepreneurs or creating a partnership with your SIBIC to create a bigger pool of new entrants in the market. So that there's more businesses, there's more taxpayers, then your tax base becomes large. So I'm hoping that we have those discussions around that, because we understand where we come from as a country, the social grants are important. I know other people are saying,
Yeah.
money. But if you know where we come from, it's important to have that. But how do you sustain it? So, yeah.
How do we make the pie bigger? All right, other tables, think about it. I'll come back to it. We are going to invite our keynote address, Mr. Jeremy Lang, who is the Managing Director of Business Partners Limited South Africa, South Africa's leading specialist financier for owner-managed small and medium-sized enterprises. Any small and medium-sized enterprises in the room? Guys, I asked if you got coffee this morning and you all said yes. With over 2 decades of experience in financial services, including 17 years within the organization, he has played a pivotal role in shaping the company's investment strategy and growth agenda. Now, Jeremy is passionate about expanding access to finance and enabling entrepreneurs to build sustainable, job-creating businesses. Now, that's the man to speak to if you are in business. Jeremy?
Right, thank you very much, and also for the warm welcome. It's been a long time since I've gotten so many compliments in a day, so thank you to you and Arnold. I wish he was that nice to me every day. He's not, I assure you. But it's such a privilege to be here and to share these few moments with you. And I'm going to take a very much more pragmatic approach through the lens of business partners rather than an academic one. But I'll share a few thoughts with you. I got a very detailed brief from Nene, and the last line was, or whatever you want to share. So I ignored everything else she said, and I just took the last line, okay? But I will touch on some elements of the budget as well and what it means for us. So, yeah, indeed a privilege to address you today on what the 2026 budget means for small and medium enterprises and what it signals for the broader business environment in which we operate. Maybe just a bit of context and the lens that we look through to the budget to share a little bit about our organization. a specialist SME risk financier with a singular focus on supporting SMEs. And we've done so for more than 45 years quite successfully. We've provided funding, technical assistance, mentorship, business premises to trade from across South Africa and some selected African countries. And our purpose is clear and simple: to empower entrepreneurs to build sustainable businesses that contribute to a more inclusive and equitable society. And that purpose remains as relevant today as ever. SMEs remain a critical part of our ecosystem, and although some may see it as peripheral to our economy, in my view, and quite on the contrary, they are central to it, contributing just over a third of the country's gross domestic product, employing more than 60% of the workforce, and remain the sector most likely to generate new employment opportunities, representing over 91% of registered businesses in the country, and often the birthplace of innovation and practical problem solving in our country. Yet, despite the importance, there remains an estimated 350 billion rand funding gap across the SME landscape. This gap reflects both constrained access to finance as well as structural barriers that continue to limit entrepreneurial growth. Moving into the budget, so that was just a bit of background and context around the landscape. The budget was fundamentally a budget of fiscal discipline, consolidation and stabilization, continued structural reform, framed within an ambition of inclusive growth. It marks what appears to be a turning point, following years of ratings downgrades, rising public debt and fiscal strain. We are now starting to see improved revenue collection, stabilizing debt levels, removal from the Financial Action Task Force grey list, as well as improved credit ratings and a narrowing budget deficit. Growth forecasts have improved, probably in a range of about 1.4, 1 to 6%, but still remain low. Inflation has reduced and stabilized, more or less within the target range. Interest rates are decreasing. However, we do not operate in isolation. Geopolitical tensions and armed conflict globally may place pressure on oil prices. We're already starting to see that rise, which could reignite inflationary pressures and constrain monetary easing. In essence, a carefully balanced budget, managing revenue expectations, expenditure control, infrastructure reform, and growth stimulation simultaneously. Not an easy task to juggle all those. For SMEs, there was some relief, but also somewhat underwhelming, hoping for more decisive interventions that would materially boost confidence and place additional liquidity directly in the hands of business owners. For example, lower corporate tax rates for SMEs, enforce penalties for late government payments, expanded and finalized, I say that because there are funds that are in process, expanded and finalized SME funding programs, enhanced tax relief for alternative energy solutions, stronger incentives for SME job creation, particularly for the youth, and greater simplification of the regulatory and compliance landscape. Now, I may be a bit biased because I come from the SME sector, but these are real challenges, real systemic challenges that SMEs face. And we need to make life a bit easier for them to operate, to grow, to spend the time on what they do best, making money, solving problems, creating wealth, creating opportunities. Yet we bed them down with cumbersome compliance and regulatory challenges and lots of taxes. These measures, in my view, would have sent a stronger confidence signal. Of course, it wasn't all bad. There were some positives that did affect SMEs, and I'm sure we will unpack that in a bit more detail later, so I won't go into detail now. The VAT threshold adjustments is a meaningful change and an impactful one. The turnover tax adjustments for smaller SMEs, capital gains tax relief on the sale of small businesses by, I think it's 55-year plus, I can't remember the details, inflationary adjustments on the income tax brackets, which will put more money in the hands of employees and hopefully reduce some pressure on disposable income and wage expectations. And then structural reform commitments is quite an important one. Despite these measures, significant structural challenges still persist, affecting SMEs. A complex regulatory and legislative environment consumes time and resources. Liquidity constraints driven by limited access to finance and late payments, and that includes government and the private sector, puts pressure on liquidity on SMEs, sometimes crippling them, sometimes forcing closure of very good businesses. Low economic growth constraining revenue expansion while overheads continue to rise, continuing to put a squeeze on margins. And inadequate municipal infrastructure and administration provision. The last point I want to just zone in on a bit because we experience the very real challenges that this imposes on SMEs. Some of the examples you may recognize: delays and inaccuracies in issuing rates clearance certificates, unexpected historical municipal billing adjustments. Suddenly there's a water meter that nobody was aware of for the last 10 years that haven't been built. Delays in rezoning applications and approvals. Unreliable water supply impacting the production of goods and services. So whilst there is a very clear demand to invest, to expand, these kinds of systemic challenges is causing delays or reducing confidence in expanding and investing. These issues are not abstract. They directly impact on business viability and delays investment and expansion decisions. Yet, in spite of these challenges, opportunities also exist. Coming out of the budget, infrastructure investment, government have confirmed it plans to spend approximately 1 trillion over the medium term in infrastructure spend, particularly in transport and logistics, rail, water, creating lots of opportunity for SMEs in installation, maintenance and upgrades, and also further down in the supply chains that SMEs can benefit meaningfully. The tax adjustments are welcomed, and where tax relief does provide incremental liquidity, it should be reinvested strategically into productivity, efficiency, and growth. Further opportunity, technology. Digital transformation and AI adoption can materially improve operational efficiency and product offerings, although these carry risks of their own. So do so carefully. Sectoral opportunities, although we have a very stable and mature sectoral base in South Africa, I see further opportunity over and above this in the renewable energy and energy services sector, residential and commercial real estate development, digital and AI-enabled services, tourism and hospitality, mining and supply chains, as well as the African continental free trade agreements that have been put in place. South African SMEs produce competitive products and services. I've seen them. They're good enough to take across our borders. The opportunity lies also in market access, investment readiness and capability development. And in my view, more awareness programs and upskilling are key interventions required to increase the use of these benefits, which will hopefully improve our growth beyond the limitations of our borders. So what does this mean for SMEs? In spite of persistent challenges, opportunity remains. SMEs continue to demonstrate resilience in adversity, innovate and solve complex problems, create employment, and they continue to build sustainable and successful enterprises. However, success will require intentional positioning. Business owners must be clear about which opportunities they intend to pursue and ensure that their businesses are ready in terms of skills and capability, in terms of regulatory and compliance readiness, administrative discipline, liquidity planning, and capital structuring. A pragmatic closing view, perhaps. The 2026 budget offers targeted relief rather than sweeping reform for SMEs. It provides incremental support rather than transformation. The VAT threshold increase, turnover tax adjustments, and CGT relief are practical steps, but they do not eliminate the need. Systemic challenges such as improved infrastructure, streamlined regulation, reliable municipal services, and expanded access to funding. The budget has, however, opened a window. Whether that window becomes a gateway depends on how entrepreneurs, funders, policymakers, and other ecosystem players respond. If we combine disciplined fiscal management with accelerated structural reform and focused SME support, small and medium businesses can convert today's modest relief into tomorrow's jobs and growth. I remain optimistic, not because the environment is easy, but because South African entrepreneurs consistently prove that resilience, innovation, and determination can overcome constraint. I wish you much success and prosperity for the year ahead. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that, Jeremy. Yes, please take a seat, and I'm going to call on Advocate Kape Wapatlamuhlaga to sit next to him, and they are going to have a discussion on that keynote. And I know by now you've got your one thing that you want to ask this gentleman sitting up here, and I'm going to give you then an opportunity to do that.
I'm looking at this one and I see it's got a trailer, and I was hoping, or maybe there's a reason for it. Good morning, Jeremy, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the time and opportunity and to speak about or reflect on one or two things as Jeremy has spoken. You know, a budget period or a budget speech is that time when everybody's looking forward to. And as Kulula has indicated, everyone is trying to hear on the entire speech. Not everyone is interested in everything. Everyone is just interested in what are they going to say about my industry, what are they going to say about me, and what benefit am I going to get out of this budget. But sometimes I sit and ask myself a difficult question and say, it's very difficult to be a finance minister because you've got to balance competing interests in the country. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that this fiscal discipline is not only about the numbers, but it's the fiscal discipline that comes into the implementation of what you have presented. Do you think, Jeremy, that as a country, we have a clear mind in terms of how disciplined we want to be? When we hear the budget being made there and speech being made there, we have all these incentives that are being mentioned. We have, you know, the tax brackets being adjusted, the growth trajectory looking positive, and the whole economy just looking positive as you look at it now. But as a country, you know, the politicians can stand there, the economists can say whatever they say they project, the accountants can punch the numbers. But as a country, are we ready for fiscal discipline, do you think?
I would say there's been progress, but we're not yet at the level we should be. And that comes down to some basics. We don't have to solve too many complex problems to increase the growth of this country. If we improve, and there's been a commitment, so time will tell the solutions now in the implementation. There's been a clear commitment to improving our infrastructure, ports, rail, road, but that must translate into actual actions That's one. The second one, corruption within these levels still exists, and I would like to see even more accountability. There are some obvious media cases that's quite public and so on at the moment, but I think more accountability at that level would also help. So I think that's another one. I think we are funding this debt service levels, our growth, without really touching the taxes is a good move in my view. I know there was some commentary around, there was an initial proposal to lift it and then it was withdrawn. So I support your statement. It's very difficult to juggle all these balls. And I think the outcome wasn't bad, let me say that. Probably serving a few different interests. I think if everyone is a little bit unhappy, that's not a bad outcome, okay? So I think probably not a bad job within the constraints of what the minister had to deal with. I did feel a bit sad, but that's also my own bias, that SMEs and the support for SMEs could have been featured more. So overall, I would say, yes, there's been improvement. I'm very happy about the debt stabilization and the reduced debt service costs. That's good. But I don't think we can bank on further reduced interest rates. I think the world will take a cautious position at the moment, depending on what comes on the outcomes of the wars. So I think all in all, good. There's been progress. We're not at the levels we need to yet. I think they're touching on all the important points, but time will tell whether that actually translates into the action and the outcomes thereof. But we know what we need to do. We know what we need to fix. It's a matter of getting the job done.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the jobs of government is to create an environment, conducive environment for business to thrive and for business to create jobs. Many a times when we talk about job creation, people think government is there to create jobs. But in fact, government is there to create an environment so that business can thrive, SMEs can thrive, and be able to create jobs. You've just mentioned statistics about SMEs or small business, the role they play in the creation of jobs. We have seen, and the minister spoke a lot about, I mean, we've got 1 trillion capital expenditure that he has spoken about over the medium term. Now, if you think about that 1 trillion and think about the past few years, many a times, National Treasury get money back. It allocates money to municipalities, to departments, to go and spend on infrastructure. Come the end of the year, they take it back because it has not been used. Now, basically starving business an opportunity of creating jobs. Do you think we think as a country, and especially as public institutions and municipalities in particular, you've mentioned a lot about the municipalities, before we submit our budget request, capital budget request, are we project ready, or are we better with project preparation? Or do we wait to get the allocation and only start project preparation at the time, leading us to this type of money back to Treasury? Or what could be the constraints in your view?
Yeah, I think number one, it's planning. There seems to be an increased hype of activity or rush to get the money out towards the fiscal year ends sometimes. So that's something we experience also. And government can't do it all. That's the bottom line. I've seen very successful government-private sector partnerships, and there should be more of that, in my view. For me, one of the biggest crises, and I'm going to call it that, in our country is youth unemployment. We've got to get the youth economically active in our country, because all that's going to happen is the reliance on the social wage grants, the social grant system is going to increase over time, and it's unsustainable. So while very much needed, I support that statement that the gentleman made earlier, but we need to get them more economically active. And how do you do that? Through sustainable and viable businesses, not by just creating job opportunities. Support SMEs, support them to grow. They will need more jobs, and I would encourage, provide incentives, good enough incentives for businesses to employ young people and upskill them and get them economically active in the working system. So coming back to your point, I'm now drifting a bit, but this is not a budget where giving money back is a good thing. We need to spend the money, right? So I think better planning, as well as holding those responsible accountable for not completing the tasks they were given to do. And I think that would improve things significantly. And you're right in your statement. By not spending, you are taking an opportunity away from a business owner to provide a good or service and grow their SME and facilitating growth within the broader ecosystem. So planning, execution, critically important, and also hold those accountable that are not doing the job that they've been employed to do.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to allow 2 or 3 questions from the floor. If you can raise your hand, I'm going to ask Jeremy just the last question. As he is reflecting on the last question or speaking, just raise your hand, then we can come back. You know, I'm sometimes wondering, Jeremy, that both government and SMEs, are we ready or are we adapting enough changes that are happening in the technology space to make sure that we are not left behind? You know, the minister can mention as many incentives as possible, but some of these incentives requires adaptability of business and the changing environment. Do you think, I mean, from your experience as business partners with your SME support, do you think the SMEs are ready or are they adapting enough to understand, one, the incentives, how they can tap into those incentives, and how they can even be proactive in job creation?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because, and I mentioned it in my address, that we're starting to see SMEs do really amazing things with technology adoption, some even AI adoption, from 2 perspectives. One, in their product and service offering and how they engage with their clients. The other is in efficiencies, improving efficiencies within the production of their goods and service. So some really amazing stuff. And by the way, technology and AI adoption on the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Assessment, last year it was number 30. This year it's number 5. So AI does present some risks that come with it, so you need to be very aware of that. It's also not about replacing labor, it's about labor working with these tools, and that's really important. So we shouldn't create fear of replacing jobs. It's about upskilling staff, upskilling employees in working with these technologies and these tools. It makes significant difference in businesses, improves output, improves margins, but it requires investment. And SMEs need funding to invest. They don't all have big cash reserves that they can just utilize. So I'm very pro the adoption of technology and AI. It must be done in a very responsible way. There are also ethical considerations around those uses. If I was government, I would deploy even greater incentives for the investment in technology and AI, make it easier, and also couple that with funding programs that's specifically dedicated for those investments. So I think that can make a difference. I've been exposed to companies around the world that have gone on this journey of digital transformation and adoption of AI. We are a bit behind, I must say that. Other countries have advanced quite a bit further than we have, but it's a process. It's a process, and we are starting to see that progress. But I think we need to be a bit more intentional about encouraging the use and implementation thereof.
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman at the back there. There's a hand. Okay.
2 questions, my good sir. Only 2.
Only 2. Okay, I've got 3 hands. Can I please allow 3? Yeah, just quick answer. Gentleman at the back, and gentleman here, and a gentleman here. Just let me take just those 3. Okay.
Can I try just with my voice? Okay. All right. Good morning. No, definitely. So my question is more to Jeremy, and I just want to zoom in on the 1 trillion allocation for the next 3 years on infrastructure. Now, when you look at these infrastructure projects, First of all, I just think the lead time that the government has given, or the time frame, they should have given more, because the infrastructure issues, the backlog is way more than 3 years. So that's just my first personal opinion. However, when we move into execution, how it happens on the ground, government pays for what you deliver, right? So which means for the service provider that is appointed, there's a working capital issue that needs to be addressed. But more than anything, because it's infrastructure backlogs, and when you look at energy, rail, ports, most of the items that are inputs that goes into those infrastructure projects are what we call long lead items from a procurement point of view. So there's a serious procurement challenge there, whereby most of the inputs are not locally manufactured, right? I'm talking from a type of steel, especially in the ports. There is no specialized steel that works in the marine that South Africa produces, whether it's Omex Steel or whoever. So you get all of those things out of South Africa. Now, where I want to come in with business partners is, how ready are you as business partners in supporting those potential service providers that will take up those opportunities? But one, you find that the historic side of the business hasn't been that great from how you traditionally view the profitability of the business. But from a project point of view, they've been awarded these projects, but the historical data does not match what the infrastructure project have been awarded, what it's reflecting. How agile are you to look at project financing directly at that project, not from a holistic company viewpoint of view, number one. Then number two, what role are you going to play from a finance cost point of view on those long lead items? Because sometimes I can place the order now, but the lead item will take me 6 months before it gets into the country, meaning I'll be paid 6 to 8 months later. What are the obligations between the timers? How agile are you, or with those breaks, in understanding how that process works, and also giving me a good finance cost where by the time I take delivery, I'm still managing to run a sustainable and profitable business, and not all the money goes into finance costs. Thank you.
Yeah, should I respond, or?
I think maybe let's take the second question.
Okay, then I'm going to need to jot down a few.
And make it.
Let's make it quick, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. So Jeremy, my question to you. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. So my question to you is that, I mean, in your speech, you mentioned that physical health has increased. I mean, gone better, right? It means for me as an SME, I think from the budget, the main thing is the vet glass that's been broken. That's been increased from 1 million to 2.3 million, right? My question now to business partners is, what, with the cost of funding being relaxed, what is your appetite in terms of funding? And is there any sectors that are on your top radar? And how do people come around?
Okay, thank you. Let's take the last one here.
Thank you so much. My question is partially covered by the latter speaker. So on the opening speech, Mr. Jeremy, you spoke about the funding gap. And you also, when drawing insights in the budget speech, you spoke about the access to the debt stability and the restoring of credibility. So I just wanted to know that, do you think this will make it easier for South African businesses, especially SMEs, to access funding? So this is the question that I have. Thank you. So much.
Yes, you can answer.
Can I ask you to use this?
All right, thank you very much for the questions. The first one around project finance, and particularly getting contracts from government with long lead times and so on. I'll give you our approach. We do fund businesses of this nature, contracts of this nature. Our approach to the funding, let me first make the comment, I understand exactly what the challenge is that you raise, because even while you are delivering your value, you're not necessarily generating cash to be able to service the contract. That's at the heart of your issue. So we do, and we've done so. Arnold's funded quite a few clients that provide services like these for government, whether it's civils, or roads, or whatever the case may be. The way in which we structure is one of two ways. Either we can match the cash flows to the payments that you get, Okay, so you can't not charge interest during the period. I mean, that's our income, but we can provide for that interest. So we capitalize the interest during the period, no cash outflow for the business itself. Okay, that's the one issue. So we can structure and tailor the transactions around to match the cash flow forecast of the business. That's true. The second point was cost of finance, and I just want to distinguish between cost of finance and structure of finance. Cost of finance is a function of risk, so that depends on the risk associated with the transaction, but I think you alluded more to structure and terms of the finance, so that can be accommodated. If it's a business, I mean, our approach is we are more forward-looking cash flow viability funders. Of course, we spend some time in the past because that gives you an indication of the track record and success capability of the entrepreneurs. So you would have to understand the reasons why it hasn't performed before. If it's because of bad business management, well, how's that going to be so different in the future? If it's because of very specific isolated incidents, a client didn't pay you, you've put other measures in place to mitigate that risk, that's something different, right? So you'll have to understand why. But we do not approve our finance because you made a profit or loss in the past. We understand the reasons why that happened, but we are very much forward-looking viability-based financiers. Of course, although you've got the contract, the risk is still in your ability to perform in terms of that contract. If I had my way, but we can't get it right, which would be a big risk mitigator, is if the government if we could take cession of those payments. But the government so far has been reluctant because of fraud and all sorts of other risks. I understand why. But that could be a big game changer if they would be willing to change their position on that with other funders, with banks, to actually see those payments directly to the SMEs. Then I think more SMEs would get funding. So yes, we do fund these kinds of contracts. Yes, we do make provision for the cash flow cash flows in terms of that contract. And lastly, if the government can change their position on reducing the risk for the funder in that process, that would open some more access to funding. Okay, I think I've covered all your issues. That was multidimensional, so I had to cover a few issues. The second one was...
Okay, no. Carry on. I just wanted to say, I think the second one and the third one, they are sort of two in one.
Okay, I will try my best, but if I don't answer, please just say that. Right. Also, multidimensional question on the second one. There is a general view that there's an increase in business confidence, that the economy is expected to grow more, and that there's green shoots of a turnaround in our economy. That would naturally improve the appetite of funders to take on more risk because SMEs are now more confident to grow and invest in their businesses in a better economic environment. Business Partners has actually always been quite pro-investing. We haven't reduced our appetite nor expanded it. It's been quite consistent over the period. But with an economic environment that's improving, of course your appetite will improve. But every funder has their risk boundaries. So beyond a certain, for example, let me use an extreme one. An economic environment is not going to fix a bad entrepreneur, for example. You will still say no to that application, right? But if economic environment supports the growth and investment of an SME, they are disciplined in their financial discipline. They've got a very compelling business case, forward-looking, and the entrepreneurs are really good. You can back them in terms of their technical and business acumen, then I would say yes, we would of course naturally increase our appetite. But it's not that we turn a tap on and off, it is gradual. But yeah, we've always been open for business. In fact, the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually, even though the economic environment was quite tough, we've improved our investment activity as an organization, which is great. Far beyond growth rates of the economy, and we're talking, I can't comment on this year because we're going to enter a close period soon, but 18-19% growth in investment activity in an economy that's growing 1%, that's quite aggressive, so, and quite bold. So Let me see if the sectors. Yeah, I mentioned some of them in the speech. Renewables is big on the opportunity list. Manufacturing in the SME space still offers an attractive investment opportunity. Real value gets created, real jobs gets added. I think we still underplay our tourism ability, our ability to offer good tourism in our country. I think we can still improve on that. Lots of opportunity there. So yeah, I think no shortage of opportunity in those sectors, but I did mention a few of them in the address. Application approach. Yeah, you can reach out to us digitally, online, walk into our offices, send a smoke signal, somebody will come. But we've got presence in all the provinces and local presence, so you're probably within reach anywhere in the country of getting access to us. But our online application portal and website is probably the best. South African businesses access to funding. Do I think the budget's going to result in increased access to funding? My view is no. I haven't seen enough that will create that. Depends also whether the transformation fund actually comes to life. There's been lots of, I won't say promises, but expectation created. I don't think it's active at the moment yet, but the word on the street says it will become active fairly soon. So it depends about new programs and the economic environment rather than specific interventions. I don't think a VAT threshold or the CGT changes or the adjustment to the tax brackets is going to make access for SMEs better. Access to funding for SMEs better. That's my view.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think Jeremy will still be around. If you've got additional questions, please touch base with him. You will get your questions answered. Thank you very much for your insights, and yeah, we're looking forward to your more enabling environment as business partners so that they can give funding. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So if you had your program in front of you, just as well you don't. So I'm the only one who knows that we are behind, because at this point, we should be moving closer to having breakfast. But I know we didn't come here to eat. We came here for the conversation. So now I'm going to call onto our stage our second and final panel, which is going to be facilitated by Shiliboy Mutiba, who is the founder of Tax Edu ZA. He's a qualified chartered accountant and fiduciary tax practitioner, founder of Tax Edu, a company with a focus on tax education. I will call him up, and then I will call his panel members at the same time. Please come and sit in front of us as I call you. The first panel member is Matsidiso Linkwasa. Matsidiso is a public finance and budget policy analyst at Section 27, where she advances fiscal interventions that strengthen the constitutional rights to basic education and access to health care within a climate-conscious and justice-centered framework. She advises Parliament, national government, and broader public platforms on how South Africa generates revenue, allocates public funds, and navigates debt in ways that build a capable, inclusive state. Now, if you wonder how they get to, these T's and dotting the I's, she's the person to ask. Why did the minister say that? Please come up. Shili, please also come up. And the second panel member is Mrs. Neo Mulifikau. She's a chartered accountant and senior lecturer at the University of South Africa, with experience lecturing at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. She holds a master's degree in South African and international taxation and specializes in taxation and accounting education. Let's welcome our panel.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Shili, sorry, if I may, we are now at 3 minutes to 10.
So half past.
Let's wrap up at 10:30.
Okay, cool. You can hear me? Okay. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me, Newa, Matsiliso. Let's have fun. Let's unpack the budget. I know that some of you have been engaging with the public in different platforms, media platforms, and engaging and unpacking the budget. I'm going to allow you, both of you, to just give us an opening remarks. Matsiliso?
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to ask, how long should my opening remarks be? Because you can...
Let's leave this to 5
minutes. Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to say good morning to everyone and thank you very much for the opportunity to engage on this. I don't know if I'm in the presence of comrades here because usually my perspectives around the budget are and the work that I've done and the advocacy over the past week have been a lot more critical because we're interested in the more social aspect. And I guess like government enabling enabling environment for business to thrive. But the way that we see it is that the businesses cannot thrive in a country that is falling apart and communities that are falling apart. And so we're trying to really pursue a budget that can in turn build, position our economy to build a nation, to build social cohesion, to really, do more than just make rhetoric around things, but actually see improvements in the lives of people in our country. And so, and I think there was a previous comment around earlier around, social grants, around job creation, those kind of things. So those are areas of interest for me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the way that we also, and maybe, I don't know, if you've been watching some of my stuff, it'll sound like I'll be probably saying the same thing, the same old thing. But really, what happens every year, in our view, is that we have the SONA, that happens in February in Cape Town. It's this lavish event where the president makes these huge political promises. And we saw that especially this year. The SONA was so long, there were so many promises, right? But then we see 2 weeks later, and those promises, they're political promises and they're for the people, especially in an election year. They're saying the things that people, what they think people want to hear. But then 2 weeks later, you have then a budget speech that doesn't necessarily fund those commitments. So, for example, if the SONA is promising social infrastructure investment, right? So we want to build more clinics and we want to build more schools in our communities. There are learners who are studying, who are being crammed in like 60 learners in one classroom that's falling apart. Learners are literally risking their lives to access the right to basic education. But then 2 weeks later, the budget speech is redirecting funding and saying, no, we're not actually allocating money towards provinces to build new schools and clinics. So we're going to maintain the status quo. In a context like that, I think that there will be, there's disgruntlement among the people, especially in the election year, where then as businesses and I think other partners in our communities, we then start to think, how do we work together and how do we rebuild in a context where people in this country are feeling so disgruntled and feeling so out of touch, to the point that I think people do not take ownership of the budget and realize that, we are all taxpayers. So whether you are lucky enough in this country to have a job or to have a business that can contribute to the fiscus, or you contribute through, let's say, your 370 rands a month social grant that you get, and you use most of that to go into town to look for a job that's not there, that fuel levy, you're also contributing to the tax base. Or when you buy, contribute like through VAT or whatever it is, we are all contributing to this tax base, and yet when it's time to talk about how this budget is going to impact ordinary people in this country, we don't have those kind of engagements with Treasury, with Parliament. And so, I'm going back to Cape Town later this afternoon. We'll be working with Parliament. I've been fighting with the Minister's office last week because we're really trying not just we're trying to do more than just have rhetoric around the budget, but we're trying to build a budget that's by the people, for the people, that can actually advance this economy that is actually going to build a nation, because we see it, especially for our generation as young people, the sites of struggle, it's no longer, we have these beautiful terminology, this constitution, all of these beautiful promises, but the sites of struggle really is in our economy. Unemployment is persistently high, and is, and it is particularly young people, particularly young black women who are bearing the burden of unemployment. Poverty rates are also persistent and persistently high. And of course, our inequality is something that plagues our country. But we also do see the budget as an opportunity to better position our economy to address these issues. Do we see this year's budget as doing that? Unfortunately not, but we can talk a little bit more about that.
We can talk more later about that. Budget for the people, by the people. Is the budget redistributive enough? You can answer that later on. No, please.
Good morning, everyone. It is a privilege just to be here in front of everyone, just sharing my thoughts and my views on the budget. So I want to kick us off perhaps by thinking or reflecting on the questions that were posed by the previous speakers over here. I think it was Arnold who mentioned that, or asked, what does a budget mean for us? And I think I want to take a few moments just to talk about that and what the budget means for me. So a budget for me means a plan. So it also comes across as a accountability tool. So how government plans on spending some of the revenue that they have generated. So that is what it means for me. And why is this important? Because it affects the take-home pay on my end. It affects the universities or funding of universities, and that is relatable to an everyday person. It affects the social grant that are received by my families, my friends. It affects the schoolings or the infrastructure of school around me and around my community, because if I can't afford, if I don't find a good school for my kid, then I would have to look at paying more to find them school that is better. But we don't want to go that way, right? So that is just what it means for me. From a revenue perspective, like I mentioned, it's just how does it affect my take-home pay? If you look at the tax revenue and how it is composed. So a big portion of it, about 40% of it, comes from personal income taxes. And that means a huge chunk of the revenue of the government comes from individuals, myself, you and me, right? So that is just what my reflection on what has been said is. Yeah.
Thank you, Neo. That is definitely true that we know that about 13% of the top individual taxpayers are responsible for 60% of the collected personal income tax. That's quite a steep. Maybe let me start with you, Matsi. So I know you're adamant that we are actually not spending enough on the social wages. Do you really think this budget is redistributive enough? Because, I mean, social wages is accounting about over 60% and is projected to do so in the next 3 years. What's your take on that?
Okay, so I think our position, and I'll speak for my sector at large, so civil society and activists, we don't just look at it as a spending problem. So we have a double problem with the budget. So it is firstly that not enough money is being invested in our communities. That's the first line thing. We have an issue with the quantum of spend. And then we also have an issue with that little money that is supposed to be going to communities doesn't actually go to that. So we see underspending, we see wasteful, irregular expenditure, we see corruption that has been eroding the value, the realization of a better life for people across our country. So in that sense, a redistributive budget, in addition to, creating opportunities for people across the country, is one that would have addressed those issues. Because perhaps maybe for us in this room, the way that we interact with the budget is around the taxes or around, a lot of our services are subsidized, perhaps maybe we're not using public healthcare services or whatever it is. But for the majority of people in this country, because our economy has failed to create meaningful employment for the majority of people in this country, what this means is that so many people have no choice but to be reliant on intervention mentions like a social relief of distress grant, which is almost like manufactured demand, right? So it gives people 317, makes it look like there's economic activity in this country, but there isn't. And so we have an economy that is, even if it is growing, it grows away from the rest of the people. And then there's this disconnect, which ends up exacerbating our inequality. And so that's why we are like the most unequal economy in the world because of that. Even when our economy does grow, it grows, but it doesn't bring the people with it. So the president talks a lot about inclusive growth and inclusive economy, but for us, the real state of the economy and the real state of inclusion, we see it in the lived experiences. And where do people, everyone else in this country, the majority of people experience this country at our public services? If they're not getting quality healthcare services, if their clinic is falling apart, their classrooms are falling apart, they're being set up to fail. This is continuing a generation of poverty, which is very difficult to escape. And we see a budget as one of those tools that could be addressing that. But as of this moment, unfortunately, it hasn't been allocating enough to addressing these urgent challenges that are facing our communities.
You're speaking about wastage and together with the irregularity that we found within the government spending. Earlier on, during these proceedings, National Treasury is identified around 12 billion through targeted spending assessment programs. And one of the things that is being mentioned there is the issue around lack of political will to deal with these issues of accountability within the system. And I'll bring you there to say, you as a tax person, knowing very well that individual are accounting majority of collected tax in the system. How does that make you feel? But I also want you to answer that question around that. How do we deal with this issue of lack of accountability? How do we deal with this issue of wastage within the system?
Yeah, so we definitely have a lack of accountability, but as a country, we're in an era of accountability that we have this Madlanga Commission that has gripped us as a nation because we're seeing like just how intense the rot has become. But for us, you know, the budget, when we talk to, let's say we talk to National Treasury or national departments, they all point fingers at each other. So we say, for instance, there's a clinic that's falling apart in, in one community in the Northwest, right? National Treasury will say, no, but that's not on us. The provincial department will say, no, but that's National Treasury, it's not us. So they're all pointing fingers at each other. But at the end of the day, the government as a whole is responsible for delivering on a constitutional obligation to deliver quality healthcare services. And so I think that there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of pointing fingers, but not enough of what do we do for people in this country. And one intervention that we would have loved to see is not just saying those terminology of consequence management, but actually investing in building the capacity of provinces to spend the money, and where they are not able to spend the money, investing in consequences and building a capable state in-house practitioners so that they can, so that the decisions or the contracts that they enter in with these implementing agents that are failing, they can be held accountable. Because right now, we can't hold anyone accountable. They're acting department heads that they are constantly rotating. So the infrastructure project, let's say, it takes 5 years to build, but there are 5 different people in that time. We can't even hold them accountable for underspending or irregular expenditure. And so we're hearing terminology or concepts around we need to build a capable state, but we're not seeing investment in saying this is how we're going to capacitate our state to be able to spend every single rand of taxpayer money that's allocated.
How does that make you feel? No? Knowing very well that the direct tax of personal income tax is one of the major tax component that makes up the tax revenue collected. And answering that, what needs to be done? I think someone else mentioned the issue of broadening the tax base. Can we really still broaden the tax base of individuals?
Okay, so my views with regards to the accountability issue, I would like to agree with TD, but I have a different view with regards to that. So for me, accountability goes hand in hand with responsibility. So, and that is something, it's a culture that needs to be sort of nurtured amongst people, and it doesn't start with government. It starts with us, the individuals within our communities. What happens when garbage is not collected in our communities? What do? Find the next place to dump that trash. Why can't we come together and collect it? So for me, accountability we expect government to be accountable monetary-wise. Yes, they must do that. They have that responsibility. But it also boils down to us as everyday people. What do we do in our different or individual spaces in terms of accounting for the services, the smaller services that are provided? How do we preserve them? So that is my view in terms of accountability. Okay. And then the second issue was with regards
the broadening of the tax base for individual in the main. Yeah.
Yes. So just with that, it goes to, I think, what one of the other speakers mentioned earlier, that there needs to be an environment that is created for small businesses to support them, because they employ a huge chunk of people, right? So if that environment is not created, if they are not supported, then I don't see how we can broaden the tax base, to be quite honest.
She doesn't see that, but maybe let me take you back. The learning and culture function is actually the largest by function, the largest expenditure. Around, it's accounting about 23.7% of the total expenditure. Do you think it's enough? I mean, to contribute towards broadening of the tax base?
Yeah. So this allocation or education, when you look at education or health budgets, the way that we also need to see them is look at the context that we're in the country, right? So over the past decade, what we've seen, decisions that government has made to bail out, say, state-owned entities, right? State-owned entities, we had issues with Eskom, we had issues with PRASA, etc. So where does this money come from? Well, they'll take money from education, like money that's supposed to hire teachers, that's supposed to hire nurses, that's supposed to hire doctors, etc., so that they can allocate them towards bailing out these state-owned entities. This works if you think, okay, fine, we can do a short-term, maybe people in this country will make a sacrifice today to fix the rail and the roads, whatever, so that in future we can have an economy that works, and then they'll get the dividends from that, right? But in reality, that's not what has happened, right? Is that we've seen a culture of lack of accountability, corruption. So that it's almost like there's been money that's been taken away from the people of this country, but they're not seeing that coming back. So they're making a sacrifice to uphold this, a country that works, or social cohesion, but there isn't cohesion in that, right? So there's been a disinvestment in education and in health. So that's why we see what we see. So you hear billions of rands that are going to this, to that, but when you go into communities, you can see that money isn't actually translating into lived reality. Well, that's also like these departments are in debt. There's negatives. There's all of those shortcomings. And so I think that if we're really going to turn the wheel and really address and really build a nation and have a budget that builds a nation, we're definitely going to have to do more and have a robust conversation around how do we grow the pie.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Before you add, just prepare yourself. We're going to take a round of questions, and yeah, you can.
I just wanted to add that with everything that you've said, I want to bring a different element to it, or to add to it. It was mentioned earlier that the youth unemployment rate is very high, but about 58% of that is made up of youth aged between 15 and 24. So when it comes to education, in my view, these people should be either in high school or at university. And that is how the budget affects us. So if there's no accountability in terms of education, then we'll remain with this huge problem of youth unemployment.
Okay. Take questions. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Can we get a mic there? There we go.
Good morning, Chile, and your panelists. So the budget has competing priorities, education, infrastructure, police, health. The list is long, So Matshidiso, from your perspective, what should be the priority of the budget?
What was the hand?
I think it's very.
Let me write it down.
Oh, it's you. Okay. No, go on, please, and then.
Thanks so much. We've spoken a lot about South Africa within a South African context, but South Africa, we don't exist in a vacuum. We're part of a global community. So I would like to hear from the panel, as tensions are rising in the Middle East, with the Iran-US-Israel conflict, what is the likely economic impact on businesses in South Africa, especially SMEs, as well as the everyday South African, you and I sitting here today? And what would you recommend every business owner start doing in order to future-proof their business? Thank you.
What was the other hand?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Good morning. My question is going to Newo. I hope you'll be able to assist me with the question. In the previous presentation, one of the topics that we highlighted was around infrastructure investment, mainly in municipalities. And some of the discussion points was the issue of upskilling and as well as holding accountable those responsible for doing whatever task that has been allocated to them. And we constantly talk accountability, and that does not exist, honestly speaking. Why? You are investing money in an environment where there is an issue of skills, and those skills, they are deliberate. Why? People are being rewarded for supporting a particular individual without looking at their expertise, without looking at the knowledge that they have about the position that has been allocated to them. Now you want people who, with metric, to manage a budget of 30 billion or so forth. How are they going to do that without the proper skills, without the proper knowledge? Thank you.
I have a sense that maybe our upcoming speaker could have something to say about that.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much for the question. So, the first question around priorities, you're right. The budget is a political exercise, and it is who has the greater muscle. If you have a strong finance, a strong basic education minister, education gets a bigger share, or etc. Right? So, what should it actually look like? Well, I think at the heart of the budget, the priority needs to be the people of this country. Right? Everything holistically that makes a person and that makes a thriving person in our community, someone who can actually enter the job market and actually thrive and grow our tax base as well, right? And so that's why I think where we differ, and the criticism that I have a lot of with regards to the budget is the budget process and the formulation, right? There's so much consultation that happens between the finance minister and the National Treasury and Washington, D.C. So, I mean, in my sector, some of the more extreme people refer to the IMF and World Bank as our overlords, right? Because they are reporting back and saying, we're going to do this, we're doing this in South Africa's economy to those people, but at the expense of engaging meaningfully with communities. I mean, I don't know how often people in this room get to speak to National Treasury in terms of shaping the budget. I'm hoping that this year with the SME interventions that have been put, they have come from people on the ground. But I think there's almost that disconnect that they take money from everyone in different ways. But then when it's time to engage and think, where should this money go? What are the priorities? We're not engaged on in the same way. And so we'd like to see a budget that doesn't just prioritize the Washington, and I'll speak to the global economy now, but also prioritizes the needs of people in this country. I think there have been some interventions, like I mentioned, if SMEs are in a better position, because the past few years, we've been criticizing the budget for prioritizing international businesses that don't actually create jobs. And when they do make excessive profits, they invest them outside of our country. But we need to be investing in our country, and we cannot give up on our people, because that's all we have, especially in this global economy where we're seeing things are going down. Like, we need to look out and have like a robust and resilient economy, right? And that also just speaks to this global economy. Some of the criticism that we had last year, believe it or not, that we were talking about this inflation targeting, and we were telling the minister that we don't agree. We've been saying this for years, and the finance minister was agreeing, and now all of a sudden something changed. Is that as much as it would be great if we could control the inflation as a country, right? But we operate in a global economy. In our country, because most young people are not working, unemployment is high. Our inflation or high prices are not being driven by high demand. They're driven by, like we have different problems. They're driven by international, I don't know if you can hear me.
Take this one.
Sorry. And I'll be quick, sorry. But they're driven largely by international, like things that happen internationally. So now we're seeing the tensions that are rising in the Middle East. Well, even though I'm sure we would love to have inflation at 3% this year, but a lot of that is going to be dependent on the oil price. And so this is why we're calling for the finance minister and treasury to be in a better position to serve the people in this country. And the best way to do that is to prioritize engaging with people, because there's so many smart people in this room who know what it takes to run a business, who know what it takes to build. Those are the kind of perspectives that should be shared in shaping a budget that can actually build a nation. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Right. So I'll just respond to, I think, the first question and the last question. I'll leave the second question to the economists. I was not that good with economics. So yeah, just in terms of priority spending, there's a lot that needs to be prioritized, to be quite honest. But what could be the top of the list for me, or in my view, is just spending on infrastructure. Infrastructure mainly relating to water. I think we are getting our balance in terms of electricity, but with water, this is very important as it will support small businesses. If there's no water, your business needs to shut down as a small business, or you will have to source some funding to make sure that you have a borehole for your business to continue running. And water is a basic need. Schools are closing because of lack of water currently. So that, for me, remains a priority in terms of where should government be prioritizing. And then with regards to the third question on accountability and skills, it goes back to education. So if we want to have individuals that are innovative, that can run businesses and run them successfully, manage them very well, we need to have to sort of develop this skill within them. And this is not just in universities. It starts from basic education, it goes to your vocational schools, the technicons. So that is where I think a lot of investment and accountability should be emphasized at.
Okay, maybe in how many minutes? 2. Okay. I want us to look into, you spoke a lot around the issue of consultation with the National Treasury, and there was a serious uproar last year, if you remember. And I think you're part of the workshop. There was this basic consultation that was going on. Do you think we need budgeting process reforms in South Africa? And I'll tell you why. One of those could be issue of engaging broadly with the stakeholders, number one. Number two, do you think with this lack of spending that you mentioned earlier, that there's money allocated, but we don't see on the grounds, shouldn't maybe perhaps we start having these budgeting process where when budget is tabled, we know for sure that this 1 billion is going through this particular project? Because I think that's one of the conversation that was being highlighted or mentioned last week.
So this is closing, right? Closing remarks?
No, we still...
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, let me try and speak as fast as possible. But yes, it is true that we definitely do need some reforms to better position our budget and our government to serve our people in the best way possible and to grow our economy, because, the status quo right now is just not cutting it for where we need to be. I will also say we are working on it. I mean, you mentioned the workshop last year that, not great, but at least we had something, right? And that came from pressure because of a budget that couldn't be passed because of the VAT increase that was tabled. And it also just showed the opportunity and also just how as much as people think like the budget is this process that's so disconnected, but it doesn't have to be, because and it is true that we need to actually understand the budget ourselves, because it's literally our money and what we can be held accountable to. And so we're also working on engaging with communities. So this whole year we'll continue to go to communities and train them, because the best way also for accountability is through social audits. So when people know that this 1 billion was allocated to go and fix this clinic, they know that actually this clinic is still like this. They can report back and we can identify corruption way quicker than we have in the past. So definitely reform budget processes, but we want to reform them for the better, so that we can really build South Africa that works for all.
Let's maybe unpack what the National Treasury is trying to do to enforce the accountability. I think earlier on also you mentioned the issue of accountability. One of the things that the Minister of Finance last week mentioned that is a challenge, I think was the Treasurer General Duncan, Dr. Duncan, is the issue around the legality between the national departments and the municipalities, where they don't have the legal lever to actually enforce some sort of accountable measures. It's a bit of difficult, and I think that's what they're trying to do. But what we have seen them doing is how they go about dispensement of the equitable share, where now they're starting to release this equitable share in phases. You know, they give you, say, 2 rand, and then account for that 2 rand. And then they give you another 2 rand. Maybe take us through all these municipal reforms that National Treasury is trying to roll out to ensure that these municipalities, because they're at the core of a service delivery, maybe take us through these reforms and if you've got confidence in them working. In closing.
I don't know if I have enough time to unpack all of that, but maybe we could do it in a podcast episode or something. But yeah, I think that because it's local governments, it's an election year, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of buzz around that. And I think after the debacle last year with the Treasury, I think as people in this country, we can definitely demand more and ask for more. And so there are reforms. There's the local government white paper that's going back and forth in terms of being amended. So I do encourage people here to look through that, because I don't know how many people are affected by the water crisis, but it's something that, you know, we need to take these hard-won victories. It wasn't always the case that in this country we could shape the processes and participate in shaping our legislation in this way. You know, these are hard-won freedoms. And I would also say that, yeah, the Treasury is starting to put pressure. I've seen the finance ministers talking about an intervention around Joburg, all of those things. But I think not only, it does feel a bit too late, but I don't want to say it's too late, because it's never too late to build a country that works. We need to just move in the right direction. But I think that we also do need to hold them accountable to more than just the rhetoric and passing the baton. Perhaps we need to be calling for engagement between government departments. So we have in the room local government, we have SALGA, we have National Treasury, we have Provincial Treasury, we have these departments, so that we can actually find out who are we holding accountable for X, Y, and Z, because they all pass the buck, and then we just sit there, we have the problem, but then it's not being solved because everyone is saying, oh no, it's not us, it's not us. And so definitely more than just rhetoric. People lied, like politicians, women, men, everybody lies, but the numbers always tell the true story. And I think now is the time where we need to take ownership of that and listen not just to the rhetoric, but see what are they committing to capacity building, what are they investing in consequence management.
Thank you. Closing. Closing words?
No, I just want to say that with this budget, it was, like the previous speakers have mentioned, a difficult job of trying to balance the physical pressures with the consumers. And I think they did fairly well. In Setswana, we have this saying that "Hube ha tshwanele setle," which is loosely translated to a little bit of something is better than nothing at all. So there is some modesty in terms of the relief, but it's not what we had anticipated. So yeah, that's just my closing remarks.
Thank you so much. We're calling for activism, right? 2026, we're up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't think I have sat in any platform where I have, had an all-women panel. Quite impressed how you pulled that off. Transformation in action. All right, we are nearly at the end, and we are going to have, our breakfast soon. We can start to smell it now and start to imagine it. But before we do that, I will call upon our last speaker of this morning, a keynote. It's Mr. Kulegani Mate, the Chief Executive Officer of Business Unity South Africa. He joined BUSA in February 2023, and before that held a position as head of financial inclusion at the Banking Association of South Africa. Mate is an experienced professional in policy development and has held various positions in the public service. He has served in the presidency, the National Planning Commission Secretariat, and the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. Now, while working at the National Planning Commission, he played a key role in the development of the National Development Plan and served as the head of the Secretariat. Now, some of the questions, and maybe that's one there, do we have the right people in the right roles for them to actually guide, what we expect them to, perhaps he can speak to. Mr. Mate?
Thank you. So, Program Director, good morning, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity. I feel like this is a setup, Program Director, because you asked me to speak to very difficult questions. What I will say is that very often I have to remind myself when I speak in platforms like this where government is implicated, I have to remind myself that I no longer work for the government. So I have no business defending the government. I left the public service 10 years ago, but something in me, okay, let's try this one. Does it work? Yeah. Okay, something in me does often, want to clarify certain things, at least as I understand them from that period. So forgive me if I do that. My primary constituency currently is business. And so I look at things from the point of view of business. And this is not to say that the view of business is divorced from that of the rest of society. Let me start by telling you a story. So I'm a typical sort of South African migrant worker because I came to this beautiful city of Johannesburg some 25 years ago because I've built a home and all of that. But I did not relinquish my roots on the north coast of KZN, very far. So every month, without fail, I drive home. I call that home. Every month, without fail. And I have seen a situation where a trip that usually took about 5.5 hours stretched to 7 hours. Why was that? It was because the road infrastructure just completely broke down. The trucks ferrying coal to Richards Bay, killing people. I kid you not, driving on that highway and coming to a standstill because you have a sort of one-way carriage and there's an accident and you're stuck for 2 hours and you later discover that that accident took 5 lives is something that happens quite frequently. And so since about the second half of last year, something began to change.
So I was driving home and I saw that they were beginning construction on that stretch of the N2. So from Emelo all the way, some of you don't know this, from Emelo all the way down to Pitriti, Pongolo, and so on. So I saw that there were markings on the side of the road and construction was going to start, and it started. And of course, it got a lot more frustrating because now when I drive home, you have to kind of set aside an additional 30 to 40 minutes because you have these stop and go things, right? Some of them sort of maximum 15 minutes, etc. But you know, there's something reassuring about that. There's something reassuring about being inconvenienced in the hope that things will get better down the line. So the frustrations of before where you're frustrated and everything doesn't work. I've had in the middle of the night a puncture because I hit a pothole in the middle of nowhere. So those kinds of frustrations, really, really horrible. And you stuck there in the middle of the night and no help, right? To being frustrated by the fact that they're actually doing something. So I start with this because in many ways, there's something positive about that. And as I say, it hasn't been around for long. One colleague of mine used to comment about the state of the South African economy and saying, we're going nowhere. You're seeing nothing, no activity in Joburg, the heart of the South African and others say African economy. You see no cranes in the sky. Nothing is being built. The contrary is true. Things are breaking, right? And so now you're beginning to see some activity taking place. Not at the level that we require, but something is happening. And so that to me is very positive. This budget that was delivered by Minister Godongwana has many positive things, and I think in many ways it signals a break from our recent past. I think some have called it a reset. Just think about where we were last year at this time. So I had the misfortune of being invited to the budget speech last year, and I was down in Cape Town sitting in that extremely hot dome. You know that thing that they've built up because they burnt the parliament, by the way, or they allowed it to be burnt down, and they're now blaming it on some bloke. So we're sitting there, and the air conditioning only works for the front part where the MPs are sitting. So those of us at the back are literally sweating. And so we wait and wait. 2:00 comes and goes and nothing is happening. And we start seeing WhatsApp messages saying that, well, the budget is cancelled. And eventually that was announced, and you know what followed thereafter. And so it was a really difficult period. I think it was frustrating in some respects. And I think many of us made comments that we probably, on reflection, should reconsider. So I'm actually glad that we went through that process and that period, because part of what we now say is a positive budget is a result of that. And I say part, not all of it, because we were down a path that was unsustainable. You had a government that did not care about where the money comes from. All they wanted was spend, spend, spend. All departments wanted more, and nobody cared about what it was being spent on, where the money came from, and all of the other issues around the budget. I'll come back to this point because it's actually very, very important. So the budget is meant to do a couple of things. Firstly, I mean, it's obvious. The budget is meant to fund the priorities of government. Now that looks straightforward, but it's not. It's not straightforward because how those priorities are determined can and often does influence how you spend the limited budget that you have. If you have a process of determining priorities that is itself flawed, then you can't hope for the budget to correct that, right? So what we saw in the previous years was exactly the opposite of what we have today when it comes to the setting of government priority. Again, the allocation of funds to those priorities is another responsibility of the budget. You know, allocation between social development to security services of the country to growth and investment, all of that. I mean, those are important things. Those are important things to balance in allocating resources. But of course, there is the question of how is the budget funded, right? Ensuring that you don't have just commitments and so on, but that budget is funded is an important part of the budgeting process. To have a budget that says all the nice things, but that cannot be funded is obviously not, is something that we can't celebrate. So we know that the funding of the budget is a combination of tax policies, tax administration, and also ensuring that you borrow and borrow in a sustainable way, right? Then there is the actual management of public funds. So yes, you allocated, are you able to manage those funds? That is a shared responsibility. It doesn't only belong to National Treasury alone, right? National Treasury has a certain responsibilities. They're set out in the Constitution. They're set out in the Public Finance Management Act. But everybody else in the government has their share of responsibility in that, because once the National Treasury signs a check, whether it is an appropriation, a part of the equitable share, then there's very, very little room and set of levers that the National Treasury can actually invoke. Very, very limited. And we can talk about that. So that is a shared responsibility. And we know what has happened in the recent past, how that has unfortunately not been well managed. And of course, then there's the liability management side of things. So how do you manage your debt and so on is a big part of it. And then overall, you would expect a budget that builds confidence, right? Confidence among citizens, that impacts positively on business and investor confidence. So people believe that actually you have a government that is well-funded, that manages things well, that has everything under control. I mean, that's what you want the budget to do. When these things are affected, then people see red, right? And they are likely to take their money out and go invest it somewhere else. And so on all of the things that I've highlighted as the responsibility of the budget, I think that the budget has done reasonably well. Of course, we can always find something that we are to criticize. On the setting of the, on the funding of government priorities, we saw, I think, a much closer alignment between the State of the Nation address and the budget than before, right? Because there was a good sense that you do not just get on that podium and promise things. I mean, there was some wild things like this speed trains thing. Politicians like saying things like that. We know it's not going to happen, not in our lifetime. So I mean, those are crazy things. But on the whole, you had much greater alignment between what the president said and what was in the budget. And that's always a good thing, because we have priorities that are actually funded. Maybe not to the full extent, but you get a sense that there was actually thought given to this. Now, let me take you some time back. In 2015, I was still in government at the time. So we then hear one evening that Minister Nene, the Minister of Finance, has been fired. And of course, everything, there's pandemonium. The capital markets, everything tanks. Now, I worked in the union buildings at the time, and we started getting a good sense that things were going down a couple of months before. And 2 weeks before the president, Zuma, launched the nuclear option, we started getting the very clear sense that he was going to fire the Minister of Finance. I had a conversation with the DG in the Treasury at the time, Lungisa Fuzile, and because the environment was so toxic, our phones were bugged. We went to the Brooklyn Mall. I mean, he said the part of this in his testimony to the Zondo Commission. We went into the Brooklyn Mall where it was noisy, switched off our phones, and we started having this conversation, telling him what I was hearing in the corridors of the union buildings. In a sense, saying, you guys need to plan for this because it's coming. But leading up to that, Zuma was so angry at National Treasury. I sat in at least 2 to 3 meetings where he would lash out at National Treasury and say, I can't understand why I, as President of the Republic, have to go to a department to ask it to fund certain priorities. What kind of president am I? Because I should be telling that department what to do. I should be telling it, and it must find the money and not the other way around. Of course, we know what he was talking about there, because there was this secret nuclear deal that the National Treasury needed to sign off on, and it wasn't budging. And so he got really frustrated. I remember he once told a story and said, the King Shaka of the Zulus achieved so much in just 12 years. Look at us. We are 25, I don't know, I must have been 25 or thereabout years in government. What have we achieved? And he blamed all of that on National Treasury, right? He didn't blame it on everything else that was going on. So you can understand when I say funding government priorities is not straightforward, because you have some of those priorities determined that would bankrupt the country. So when one thinks about and reflects on the budget, one has to bear in mind that sometimes these are competing priorities. They're not just priorities between education and this and that. Sometimes there are many, many underlying big ticket issues that people want to pursue for whatever reason. So is this fast, whatever, high-speed train part of those things that is creeping up on us unawares, and suddenly some deal will be signed by some Chinese, to fund this thing? I don't know. But all I'm saying is that these things are not innocent. When you hear politicians say things and they promise big things in an economy that's not growing, how are they going to fund it? to me, these are signals of some bad backroom dealings. And so when you turn to the fiscal allocations themselves, I've already said that we are in an environment where growth is weak, but the budget from our point of view really tried hard to balance, give something to social development services, security and infrastructure. We also saw that there was an attempt to balance between consumption expenditure and investment. We saw that there was an intention to crowd in private investment, recognizing that the state balance sheet was quite weak. And of course, in terms of the funding of the budget, my colleagues in the mining industry were upset. They issued a statement decrying the fact that the minister said nothing about the role played by their sector in the relief that we saw in the budget, because essentially all of the positive things, or many of them, were a result of the windfall from the mining industry, in particular gold and platinum. So they were saying, well, the minister could have acknowledged that. We've actually saved him and saved the country, so to speak. So we know that in an economy that's not growing, funding the budget is always going to be difficult. And so we also saw that effective tax administration helped a great deal. And that's what you want. You want an economy that can support itself. So my colleague spoke about the Washington, consulting more with Washington. Let me say something about that. Because there was a time right up to, say, 2008, maybe even 2010, where the World Bank and the IMF were actually salivating at the prospect of lending to South Africa, because we had no loan. We had no World Bank loan up to that point. All of the balances were positive. We had much bigger headroom to borrow. When Jacob Zuma took over as president, our debt to GDP was around 22%, right? When he left office, it was in about 60-something% as a proportion of GDP, right? So what happened there is that part of it, let me just start by saying that, so one of our biggest loans to the World Bank was the $27 billion loan that funded Medupi and Kusile. From that point onwards, right, we became indebted to the World Bank. And we've continued to borrow. By the way, borrowing from the World Bank, horrible as it is, the terms are still favorable, right? But it does mean that you have to they are now you now owe them, and so you have to discuss things the same way that when there's a change in your own personal life, that means you might not be able to meet your obligation. You have to talk to your bank. People who don't talk to their banks, they have their houses and cars and all sorts of things repossessed. So talking to your lenders is actually a good practice. But I do want to say that to the extent there is some, and I think the idea that the Treasury, consults more with the World Bank and those guys in Washington is a misnomer. But to the extent that it happens, it's because we are now indebted, right? The same way that anybody who is indebted. I know this because, as I've said, the World Bank was trying so hard to get us to borrow. And we said, no, we don't need your borrowing. We had an economy that was growing. We had a tax administration that was efficient. So we could fund ourselves until that moment when things went south and people wanted things. In fact, for all of this increase in our debt to GDP, there is nothing to show.
You know, all of the spending in 2010 on that infrastructure, even that was not funded by external borrowing. It was funded by ourselves internally. And everything that happened beyond that, tell me what we paid for. Of course, we paid for Medupi. Medupi started, Medupi and Gusile cost more, double what it was meant to. So this idea of prudent fiscal management is absolutely critical. I realize that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move towards the end and just say that from all aspects, we think from the private sector point of view that this budget has been positive. Of course, we could do better. The RAND response to the budget does indicate that it was very well received, very confidence building, and that in particular what we looked for was whether in the budget there were kind of growth enhancing reforms. And a big part of that was the commitments to one, infrastructure investment, but also the reforms to state monopolies so that you have private sector investment on the one hand, but also creating a very competitive markets in energy, competitive markets in road, rail, and in particular rail and ports. And we see that happening, and we see investment happening. And so we think that if we go down this trajectory, we're likely to see ourselves lifting ourselves up through our bootstraps rather than relying on intent. Over time, this should start to spur growth that begins to finance our own development as a nation. And so a lot more positive. We would have liked more, but we are realistic about the fact that in a 1.4, 1.6 economy, the scope is very limited of what you can do. Thank you very much.
All right, please take a seat. We will go into our Q&A, and I will allow Shiliboy to, or is it, okay, to just take the round of questions. But I think that story just reminded me of the tension, in my own house, where my youngest son he has got all these national priorities, and they expect, Treasury to find the money for. So please, hands. Yeah, maybe go to the front. Can we get hands? You heard the cutlery is going, the food is ready. So the quicker we ask these questions, the quicker we can go out there and eat.
Just facilitate questions.
All right, I see a hand over there. 2, 3, in that order. Okay, 1, 2, and 3 over here.
You can go ahead, please. Please ask me your question.
Okay, so I have a question. I just wanted to find your views on how, because I believe it remains a challenge, how we can grow the tech space. I have my own views on, or I shared my views on how we can do that. Do you perhaps have a different view on how that tech space can be expanded, just to relieve some pressure of the individuals?
Okay, thank you so much and for the insightful discussion. I just wanted to understand that looking at the overall budget, where do you realistically see improvements in the next year or two, and how should businesses, especially SMEs, position themselves to be able to take advantage of that improvement? Thank you.
And the third hand over here, and then we can answer.
Morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I just like to ask business partners that do you only do funding, whereas the bigger challenge is actually access to the markets? So, and how the budget itself is opening that opportunity. Thanks.
Okay, we can answer, and then we will take one last round and close. Thank you.
Okay, so
So apparently my voice is not big enough. I need a mic that is really sensitive. You can see I was never a trade unionist. So how do we grow the tax base? My views are not different to yours. I do think, there's no complicated and sophisticated economics here. You obviously need to get the economy growing, more people being employed so they contribute to tax. And the third part, of course, is that you need a thriving small business sector. Now, somebody might say, but small businesses are exempt up to a certain level. That they're only exempt from company income tax, right? But they pay VAT like all of us. And so when you have a booming SME sector, you actually get more tax receipts, mostly VAT tax. So in a sense, all I'm saying is that we need to drive growth, and our ability to drive both growth and employment is dependent on the small business sector. There was a study done by Harun Borat from UCT that essentially maps out how we compare to economies of our size in terms of employment. And what they find is that in economies like ours, about 45% of the people who are employed in the formal sector, so corporations and all of that. And that the next 45% of employed people are employed in the SME sector, right? Including informal sector. And then the remaining 10% was unemployed. This was true and held throughout the economies of our size. So 45, 45, 10. How does that compare to South Africa? What they found was that the share of employment in the formal sector holds up quite well in South Africa. In fact, 50% of the people who are employed today are employed in the formal sector. So we do better than the average of our peers. But where we stumble is that only 16% of people who identified themselves as employed are employed in the SME and informal sector. The remainder is unemployment. In our case, 32, at the time they did the study, was sort of close to 34%. So it tells us that our ability to solve many of our problems lie in how we stimulate the SME sector, we free informal economic activity. And informal here doesn't mean illegal. People rush to say, informal is going to... No, informal doesn't mean illegal. It's men and women who go out every day, hustle in the street, put up a stall, sell something. That's what we want. We want a lot more chaos in our streets of people trying to make a living, rather than have clean streets of Sandton where people don't make a living, because that is just, you're building up towards an explosion at some later point. So I think that in part answers the second question about the opportunities for the SME sector. The president talked about really doing something about red tape. He said that many times, but there's been more and more evidence that says you are throttling small businesses. We need a complete change. That change is going to unlock the possibilities that we're talking about. Of course, there's possibilities in the infrastructure space, etc., where small businesses and so on can play a role, but also we need more of it outside of those formal sectors. So thank you very much.
Jeremy, if you can answer that question.
Yeah, maybe just to add one or 2 points, and then I'll also answer the gentleman's question, if I may. I come back to my unemployment, youth crisis, and education. And I know the short-term goals and objectives that we need to address, but I did wonder whether we are investing enough in our budget for the future, because there is to me a skills gap between a progressive economy moving towards from a primary to a service-based economy. There's a bit of a skills gap for me that we are not plugging. So there are opportunities in the formal sector, but not necessarily always the skills to match. And what are we doing to upskill our youth, prepare them for that eventuality? The dawn of digital and AI transformation, it's already now moving to the next phase. So what are we doing to upskill, prepare our youth and equip them with the skills they need to actually get employment in these opportunities? That's the one. I'm not so sure we are doing enough, or certainly wasn't highlighted enough, but I do acknowledge there are competing priorities. So education and incentivizing SMEs to actually employ, develop, upskill, because once you are in the working system, your probability to remain there is higher. So as long as you keep upskilling yourself. So I'm a firm believer in investing more now for the future. Maybe it's not a 12-month goal, and I know we need to fix up some things, but I do take a view we should be investing there a bit more. Secondly, just coming back to the business partners question, yes, the SME landscape is quite large, it's complex. We acknowledge very early we can't be everything to everyone, and we have a role to play. But we do try and facilitate it through our technical assistance. So we don't have the resources in-house, but we do employ specialists in the broader community on a need-by-need basis. So for two reasons. One, and we fund that, by the way, at 0% interest to enhance good businesses. So it normally stems from two considerations. One, the clients know what they need, the entrepreneurs know where they're short and what kind of assistance they need. Secondly, it's a risk that we assess during the due diligence process, and we offer that to them. So, but it doesn't solve the systemic problem that you raise. We're relatively small in the broader SME landscape. It's our way in which we can facilitate that. But it also comes at a cost. But ultimately, it's difficult to be everything to everyone in this space. And we found our position to play, which is growth-based financing for entrepreneurs. And within that ambit, each application on its own merit, we try and enhance that business in our engagement with them. But we are certainly not at the level of solving systemic issues around market access. I still believe the Africa Free Trade Agreement is a great opportunity. We make good enough stuff to take across the borders. I'm not so sure clients are always aware of the program to the extent they should be, and they have confidence to actually go and trade beyond the SA borders. So I think some awareness training, some hand-holding, building confidence in that program can help. There's really big markets across our borders. And I think in terms of our ability, the cost and efficiencies at which we produce goods and services, we can compete in those markets.
Can we take last round of questions?
Right.
One there, I see Vusi.
There's one hand.
Where?
So one thing.
Okay, one second question. It's not working. No, but before we take that, I just want to pose, I mean, you mentioned the issue of lack of skills, the youth that can't match these opportunities. And the budget actually spoke to that, because has been, the National Treasury communicated that SETAs are not actually producing the required skills to stimulate economic growth. And I wanted to find out from business, what has been your experience in dealing with SETAs, and also maybe the skill set that is coming out of those SETAs, because currently National Treasury has actually commissioned Government Technical Advisory Center to actually review the overall SETA ecosystem, maybe to come up with output that can actually match these opportunities, and then we can allow the other questions.
So yesterday evening, I was supposed to meet with Minister Manamela to discuss this very question. I couldn't because I was stuck in Accra, so my flight was delayed by 24 hours. But the meeting was in response to a very strongly worded letter that we sent to him about how the SETA system is dysfunctional. To his credit, he's been willing to listen. We've already had a meeting and a half, so don't ask me what the half is, with him, in which we raised these issues very, very strongly. So part of the announcement by both the president and the minister is in response to the pressure coming up from the private sector. Why this is refreshing is because back in 2012, Minister Blade Nzimande came in and changed regulations that governed the allocation of grants, the so-called mandatory grants and discretionary grants. Previously, in terms of the 2006 regulations, 50% of the grants were mandatory. In other words, the SETAs were mandated to give back to the companies so that they can train their own employees, etc., etc. Blade Nzimande came and said, we don't trust this private sector to train. We want a bigger share of that to be discretionary, which means that some SETA bureaucrats decide what I need, what kind of skills I need. He dropped that to 20%, by the way. We have been fighting them in court since 2012. There's still a remaining part of this in court still. Basically, what we were saying is give employers more funds to do their own training. So part of what you see is out of that. But even without that, our system has completely failed, right? It just doesn't produce the skills that we need in this economy. And so I think there's beginning to be appreciation of that fact. The overhaul that is referred to is refreshing, but I should say as a last thing that we should not rest in our laurels, because there are some people who have benefited from the dysfunctionality, and they will fight hard for things to stay as they are. And so we need to continue to push for reforms that will actually give us a skills development system that benefits the country.
Thank you. Can we proceed? Thanks, CEO, my CEO of SIBIP. Hey, Jeremy, it's difficult doing business in the rest of the continent. I hear you talking about Africa free trade. It's not easy, bro. So good luck, And I cry for our brother who's running it. So in your introduction earlier, when you spoke about SMEs contributing a third to the GDP and 60% of workforce, and I hear Gamate, this site is contradicting you, quoting a UCT study, but I'm comfortable with you with your numbers. So based on that, a third of contribution to GDP, those were your words, 60% workforce. Do you think the government is giving enough due recognition to the SME sector? Exemption to company tax, for me, that's peanuts. That's nothing, So do you think government is doing enough recognition in terms of the sector? And if yes, just give me one example. Then I'll go home.
The last hand is over there.
Is that you?
Thank you. I think from my side, and apologies, I arrived late, so I didn't hear much of the post-budget speech discussion. So from my side, I'm an economist. I studied economics, and so my question is based on the traditional way of doing the budget in South Africa. Is it aligned with the changes in the global economy as it is right now? Because now, if I can put a few points in terms of the traditional way of how these budgets are pulled up, it's not necessarily aligned with how, the global trade is currently open, and reason being is when you think about it, we were speaking about SMEs. SMEs right now, there's a lot of companies that are thriving on e-commerce, for instance. We import stuff, obviously, from China, from wherever. it comes this side to South Africa, we struggle at the customs and so forth. We have to pay, custom duties and so forth. So now to a small company, that's a very big cost, because now your goods wait at the port for more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then after that, you still have to pay your freight, you still have to pay this. These are type of things that are not aligned with some of the discussions that, when they do the budgets in terms of how do you uplift. And then it goes back to what you were saying, sir, about the training as well. There's a huge gap. I'm also in ICT, and we do trainings with SETAs and so forth. We do skills development and so forth. But we get to a point where, in terms of the gap, I always make an example that we have all this youth that have cell phones. They only know how to use cell phones for your social media and so forth. But the cell phone is a very powerful tool. And then you get to a laptop. They can't do a lot of stuff, So my question is just in terms of, with regards to the traditional way of doing the budget, is it aligned with the new global trade as a whole? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take the first one, yeah? To the gentleman at the back who wants to go home after I tell him the government's doing enough. Unfortunately, you're not going home today, but I will share a few thoughts with you. I think government doesn't do nothing. Let me recognize that, but I think they can do more, and it's simple things. I see firsthand how businesses struggle because they don't get money paid on time. They've provided the goods and service, they've honored all the administrative requirements, and yet they have to struggle. They have wages to pay, they have suppliers to pay, and sometimes funders, creditors are not that patient, and very good businesses fail as a result. So I think government can do more, and this is not a new issue. It's been raised time and time again, although I must also say some departments better than others. Secondly, I think provision to access for funding, not that they don't do it, there are institutions that do. I think the manner in which they deliver must be better, quicker, faster, because otherwise, you think of it this way, you can't wait 6 months, 8 months, 12 months for a decision to be made, money in the bank. The opportunity has come and gone by that stage, right? So more efficient delivery, I think, is one way in which they can do that. The second last point is partnerships with the private sector can play a very good role, and I've seen it work very well. If you start to create blended funds with government where they not necessarily take the delivery mechanism, but provide patient concessionary capital that kind of matches equity enhancement type of instruments, it will mobilize capital on the private sector side. Why I say that? We were part of some of those programs, and I've seen it work really well. So there to me lies a lot of value, which the end result is SMEs would get access to finance where they otherwise would not have, and it's generally at a much lower cost of capital because of the impact and commercial return expectation blend. So those work really well. And then lastly, I believe the tax legal framework and compliance framework is too complex for SMEs. You need to simplify it. You need to lower the cost of taxes from them so that they can reinvest that in the growth of their businesses. And I think the end result will actually be higher level of taxes for the government rather than lower.
So a couple of thoughts here. Let me just clarify first the issue about SMEs and sort of contribution to GDP, and say that he's right in terms of the SMEs, South African SMEs contribution to GDP being 60-65%. That is true. So the numbers I was referring to is contribution to employment. And even then, let me explain that. So the study actually looks at the informal, so the lower end, the informal part of that. So any part that is formal, i.e. registered, paying tax or whatever, but that is in the sort of formal sector is counted in the 50% that I spoke about. So there is no contradiction, it's just how things are defined within that. What is true though is that our SME sector is still small in comparison to our peers in many economies, up to 95% of employment is in fact in this SME sector. We are sitting way down. And so, I mean, the point is still valid that we need a much bigger, a much more vibrant SME sector. I mean, I'm not too sure that we're talking about the same thing when we talk about, I mean, I'll give you some thoughts, but I don't know that I know what you have in your mind when you say the traditional way of budgeting, right? I'll give you my thoughts nonetheless, which is that, I mean, at the end of the day, budgeting, it responds to how priorities are determined, right? And so the question should be about, are we determining the right priorities? Because you cannot have a budget that diverges completely from those priorities. It has to balance them, but it doesn't come up with its own priorities. And so we've gone through good times where first in the sort of first few years of our democracy, there was tightening of the belt because we needed to live within our means, and you know what we went through. We went through gear, and you were not born then. We're up in arms and so on. And then we went through the early 2000s when the economy started picking up, and you saw an increase, a massive increase in our social security or social assistance program, etc., etc. In that period of good times, how things used to happen was a thing called the Medium-Term Expenditure Committee in the National Treasury. So essentially what the process starts around July, where a circular is sent out to departments to say, give us your budget proposals. And so each department will send their budget requests. As you can imagine, nobody says, I don't need any money, or please cut my budget, it's too much, I can't deal with it. All of them wanted more. And during the good times, they got more. So you had Trevor Manuel getting onto the podium and saying, I'm giving you, and it was all good. Until we reached the bad times, right? It was so hard to claw back and try to get people to live within their means. But at the end of the day, traditional or not, are we determining priorities today that are going to make us a competitive economy into the future? In areas like AI and so on, that is an open question. What I can tell you as a final thing is there's an organization that I'm associated with called Collective X. They've done some work on employment opportunities in South Africa for entry-level digital skills. That at any given point in this economy, we've got about 60,000 jobs for entry-level skills, digital skills. We cannot fill those, so we are offshoring those skills. We are hiring people in India and elsewhere who have these skills to do this sort of stuff. And there's a movement that says we can onshore those jobs. In other words, make sure we develop those skills so that those people are employed in South Africa. This talks to you about, are we today spending on the things that will make us a competitive economy into the future? The jury is still out on that one.
Okay. I think let me close with the last question. We have been speaking about how do we broaden the tax base, and we cannot live here without talking about illicit trade. And it came out and it reflected in the numbers. We saw the manufacturing tax collections actually performing poorly, despite CIT being one of the largest contributors to our tax revenue. As business community, what are you doing to counter the illicit trade? And also supporting the government in dealing with illicit trade, because you and I can agree that we're losing billions and billions to the fiscus.
In fact, the announcement by BAT of closing their manufacturing plant here is not something that happened overnight. BAT, together with us, have been lobbying the government to say, do something here, right? They've moved from a situation where, or to a situation where about 70% of the cigarettes sold in the South African economy is through illicit channels. 70%, which means no taxes are paid, etc., etc., cannibalizing, by the way, companies that are paying taxes, right? And of course, it goes back to a degree to the really stupid decisions by government during COVID of saying people can't buy cigarettes, right? And that just became the boon for the underground, because people they didn't stop smoking. They continued smoking, and the question is, where do you think they're getting their fix from? And since then, it's been difficult to curb this stuff. And this is true in other sectors of the economy. And we have been campaigning twice in the past 4 years. We've partnered with a US-based organization, Tracit, which does work on transnational illicit crimes, to really try and bring this issue to the table to our government. Our government has been very slow, disappointingly slow. So yes, they're saying the right things now. They should have done this a long time ago. We are now, unfortunately, living through the consequences of that inaction. And so we've been offering to work with government, using technology to help government deal with this. But as with the failure to manage borders, etc., they haven't been able to make sure that any product that goes in and out of the country is properly recorded and so on. And so we've got, our economy is flooded by goods that come into the country illegally.
A lot of input tax, a lot of VAT not being collected as a result. Let me thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, we are wrapping up. So when we started, I asked, what is your one thing? And I'm hoping that you got your one thing. So at this stage, we've got 3 people in the room. The person who had a light bulb moment, I know now something that I didn't know before I got here. And the one who has, some hope. I see a light at the end of the tunnel. And the third one is still indifferent. Does it even matter? Or it makes no difference to me at all? Which are you? The first person, light bulb, show of hands. Okay, I can count them in one hand. Hope, I see a light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm assuming the rest of you are indifferent. Does it even matter? It makes no difference to me. If that's you, then stick around our panel members at breakfast so that they move you up to hope. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I will call on Unil, who is going to thank you and send you off to have breakfast, and hopefully that takes you up to light bulb. Thank you.
Okay, no, perfect. Are you guys done? Okay, so firstly, I want to thank all the women for attending. All of you guys looked really beautiful. For the gents, all protocols are observed. Firstly, I want to thank Shilly Boy. I think we started this journey last year. So thank you for him for lobbying us. I remember in January, Shilly Boy sent me a message saying, "Chief, we are sleeping. We need to move and get this organized." So thank you so much. So Shilly Boy, we just have some gifts. If you can just come to the front. And I think everybody else that we're going to thank, if you can come to the front, because we're just going to take a picture. So next, we also want to thank Ms. Matsidiso. Matsidiso. Yeah, so if you can also come to the front. Then Ms. Neo, if you can also come to the front. Ms. Kuluwa, please come to the front. Mr. Kulekani and Mr. Kape, if you can also make your way to the front. And then lastly, I want to thank the marketing team for putting together an amazing event. For those who want to speak to a business partners representative with regards to funding, so my team is available. If they can just raise their hand. So there's two senior deal makers here, and there's one intern. And then lastly, I just want to thank Jeremy, my boss's boss's boss, for his unwavering support throughout our business partners journey. So thank you so much for attending. If you can also come to the front.
He's not getting
Yeah, apparently he bought the gift, so he's not getting a gift.